Bruce Lee's most dangerous fight didn't happen on a stage, in a tournament, or on film. There was no referee, no applause, and no recorded footage. Only 9 people were present, and none of them spoke publicly about it for years. What happened in that alley wasn't loud, cinematic, or dramatic. It was quiet, controlled, almost invisible. Yet every person who witnessed it later described the same feeling. They had just seen something they were not supposed to see. This is the story of Bruce Lee's most silent fight, and why those who saw it never looked at combat the same way again. It happened in Los Angeles in the late summer of 1964. The location wasn't a dojo, it wasn't a tournament hall, and it wasn't meant for fighting at all. It was a narrow alley in downtown, between 2 weathered brick buildings, surrounded by rusted trash cans and metal fire escapes that dripped water from broken pipes. The ground was cracked asphalt, stained with motor oil and shallow puddles that reflected the gray sky. The afternoon was hot and humid. The August sun filtered through urban haze, creating long, distorted shadows on the red brick walls. The air was thick, smelling of accumulated garbage, burned motor oil, and concrete heated by the endless afternoon. There were no posters announcing the event, no publicity, and no scheduled or formally invited spectators. The doors of adjacent buildings were locked, windows covered with torn curtains dirty with soot. Some had boards nailed over them, others just broken glass covered with plastic sheeting. 9 men were present, strategically positioned at the ends of the alley, creating a natural human barrier. All of them were experienced martial artists, men who had dedicated years to the study of combat. All of them understood real violence, not the romanticized version from movies, and all of them sincerely believed they were about to witness a simple demonstration of techniques, not a genuine confrontation that would change their fundamental understanding of power and control. Bruce Lee arrived quietly, walking through the narrow alley entrance with measured, deliberate steps. There was no entourage following his footsteps, no dramatic entrance with music or announcement, and no visible tension in his shoulders or face. He wore simple, loose clothing, light black cotton pants and a white sleeveless t-shirt that revealed his compact but defined arms, chosen for absolute practicality and not to visually impress. He didn't stretch ostentatiously or shadowbox to warm up. He didn't pace nervously from one side of the alley to the other trying to assert presence or intimidate. He simply stood still near a brick wall, relaxed but present, breathing slowly and deeply. His posture calm but completely alert. His dark eyes swept the alley briefly, not seeking approval from the men gathered there, but collecting information about the space, the distances, the surfaces, the angles. On the other side of the alley, approximately 15 feet away, stood a man who, unlike Bruce, had absolutely no interest in martial philosophy or theoretical discussion. He had come to test something concrete and definitive. His name would later be deliberately omitted from most accounts, not because he lacked impressive skill or legitimate credentials, but because publicly acknowledging the encounter meant admitting something deeply uncomfortable about the limitations of one's own training and one's own strength. He was an imposing, intimidating black man, significantly taller than Bruce, heavier, with broad, powerful shoulders that seemed carved from dark stone by an artist obsessed with raw strength. His arms were thick as young tree trunks, each muscle clearly defined and visible under dark skin that glistened slightly with sweat in the hot, humid afternoon. He was about 35 years old, in the prime of his physical strength, wearing a white tank top already stained with sweat that barely contained his massive, developed torso, and worn gray sweatpants. His hands were enormous and disproportionate, like hammers made of flesh and bone. The knuckles marked with white and pink scars from countless fights inside and outside official rings. He was a former West Coast heavyweight boxing champion, known in Los Angeles underground circles for his absolutely devastating power and proven lethal capability. He had knocked out 47 of his 52 professional opponents, many of them in the first 3 rounds, several in the first minute. His record spoke of dominance, of overwhelming force applied with technical precision. His body showed decades of brutal conditioning, built to absorb punishment and dominate space through sheer physical presence. Within Los Angeles street fighting circles, he was respected, even feared. His hands, officially registered as lethal weapons after a bar fight that nearly killed 3 men simultaneously, were known for ending confrontations in seconds, leaving opponents unconscious or worse. He had heard about Bruce Lee through the martial arts grapevine, through whispered conversations in gyms and dojos across the city. A Chinese martial artist who taught openly, who questioned tradition, who rejected rigid forms and ancient hierarchies, and most controversially, who taught non-Chinese students, breaking the sacred code of cultural exclusivity that had governed Kung Fu for centuries. This bothered him deeply, not out of racism, but out of traditional respect for boundaries and established order. But what truly brought him to this alley on this hot August afternoon was something more personal. He believed Bruce Lee was dangerous, but not for physical reasons. Bruce represented a threat to everything he understood about martial arts, about respect, about the proper way things should be done. Bruce spoke about efficiency over tradition, about what works over what looks impressive, about individual expression over systematic obedience. These ideas threatened the foundation of everything the boxer had built his identity upon. This meeting wasn't officially a challenge, no formal words had been exchanged, no contracts signed, no witnesses officially summoned. But everyone in the alley understood exactly what it truly was. A test. A reckoning. A moment where philosophy would meet physicality. Where theory would face brutal reality, where the small Chinese man's revolutionary ideas would be measured against the overwhelming force of a battle-tested champion. No formal rules were announced, yet several things were understood through silence alone, through the unspoken code that governed such encounters. No spectators beyond those present, no interruptions, no matter what happened, no serious injuries intended, but no limits explicitly promised either. No weapons, no help, no mercy if things escalated beyond control. This wasn't about winning in the conventional sense. It was about control, about dominance, about proving which approach to combat held truth when everything else was stripped away. The men in the alley instinctively formed a loose circle at the perimeter, their backs against the brick walls and fire escape ladders. Nobody stepped back from their positions. Nobody sat down or looked away. Every breath felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened with anticipation and unspoken tension. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the asphalt, creating a natural arena marked by light and darkness. Bruce remained motionless near his wall, his breathing steady and controlled, his face expressionless. The boxer assumed his fighting stance, classic orthodox boxing position, guard high and tight, left foot forward, right foot back, weight distributed on the balls of his feet, knees slightly bent, ready to explode forward with devastating power. His massive fists were already clenched, his shoulders rolled forward protectively, his chin tucked behind his left shoulder. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready, dangerous. And then, without warning, without countdown, without formal signal, the fight began. There was no shout, no dramatic charge, no explosive opening strike that shattered the silence. To an untrained observer watching from the fire escape above, it might have looked like nothing was happening at all, like two men simply standing and breathing. Two bodies moved almost imperceptibly. A subtle step forward from the boxer, a minute shift of weight from Bruce. Brief contact between forearms as the distance closed. But the men watching from the perimeter felt it instantly, viscerally. The atmosphere changed, became electric, dangerous. The boxer attacked with decisive forward pressure, his left jab snapping out with professional speed and precision, attempting to establish range and dominance. It was textbook perfect, the kind of jab that had opened the defense of dozens of opponents, setting up the devastating right cross that ended fights. He followed immediately with his right hand, rotating his hips, driving his weight forward, attempting to overwhelm Bruce with structure, mass, and the accumulated power of 2 decades of professional boxing training. Bruce did not retreat backward, and he did not resist directly with opposing force. Instead, he did something that confused everyone present, something that seemed to violate basic fighting logic. He disappeared, not physically, not by moving away, but structurally. His body seemed to become absent even while remaining present. One witness would later describe it, struggling to find adequate words, as trying to grab smoke that somehow pushed back. Bruce's movements were minimal, economical, almost lazy in their efficiency. Yet every time the boxer's strikes made contact or attempted to land, Bruce's body position had already shifted. The boxer's balance tilted slightly off-center without him understanding why. His force never landed cleanly on a stable target. His power never found the resistance it expected, the solid structure it needed to transfer energy and create damage. Bruce wasn't blocking in the traditional sense, meeting force with counterforce. And he wasn't striking, wasn't attacking, wasn't trying to damage or hurt. He was doing something far more unsettling. He was removing certainty, dissolving the framework the boxer relied upon, making every assumption fail without obvious reason. Within seconds, something profoundly unsettling became clear to everyone watching from the perimeter. This wasn't a test of strength, wasn't a comparison of who hit harder or who was tougher. It wasn't even a fight in the conventional sense that any of them understood. It was an experiment, a live demonstration of principles that couldn't be explained, only experienced, and Bruce Lee was in complete control of it. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved from their positions against the walls. The only sounds in the alley were controlled breathing from both fighters, the soft friction of feet against rough asphalt, and the distant rumble of traffic from the main street 2 blocks away. The fight continued, fast but not frantic, quiet but intensely focused, and profoundly uncomfortable to watch, because the longer it lasted, the clearer the disturbing truth became. The boxer wasn't losing in the traditional sense. He wasn't being beaten, wasn't being hurt, wasn't being dominated through superior power or speed. He was being studied, analyzed, read like an open book. Bruce wasn't trying to finish him, wasn't attempting to knock him out or force a submission. He was trying to understand him completely, to map every habit, every pattern, every predictable response. And that realization unsettled the men watching from the perimeter far more than violence ever could. They had all been in fights, had all experienced and witnessed brutal confrontations. Violence they understood, but this systematic dismantling of certainty without visible aggression was something entirely different, something that challenged their most fundamental assumptions about combat and dominance. The silent fight had already crossed a point of no return, but the most disturbing moment had not yet happened. What unsettled the witnesses most was not the absence of sound, but the absence of chaos. Fights, especially between skilled and powerful men, usually create noise and disorder. Breath becomes ragged and desperate. Feet scrape aggressively against the ground. Bodies collide with sharp intent and impact. This fight produced none of that familiar violence. It unfolded like a controlled malfunction, a systematic failure where one system behaved exactly as designed and expected, while the other quietly failed to find anything solid to work against, like a perfectly engineered machine trying to grip water. The boxer pressed forward again, increasing his commitment, attempting to force Bruce into a static exchange where mass and structural power could dominate. His footwork grew heavier, more deliberate and aggressive, designed to cut off escape routes and trap Bruce against the brick wall behind him. He threw combinations now, left jab, right cross, left hook, professional sequences drilled into muscle memory through 10,000 hours of practice. Each punch carried genuine knockout power, enough force to end the fight if any landed cleanly. But every time the distance closed, every time impact seemed inevitable, Bruce was already gone, not retreating, not circling away in panic, simply no longer positioned where force expected resistance to be. His footwork was minimal, almost invisible, just enough displacement to make power miss its target by inches. The men watching began to notice a pattern that was difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore once perceived. Bruce never met pressure head-on with opposing pressure. He didn't collide with force, didn't absorb impact, didn't try to match strength with strength. He redirected it so subtly, so efficiently, that it appeared to collapse under its own intent, like water flowing around an obstacle. When the boxer pushed forward, Bruce shifted angle. When the boxer pulled back to reset, Bruce emptied the line, giving nothing to pull against. When the boxer attempted to seize control of Bruce's arm or torso, hoping to use his superior strength in close range, he found nothing stable to hold onto, no fixed structure to manipulate. It was as if Bruce's body had no fixed center, no solid core, only transitions and adjustments that flowed seamlessly from one position to another. Strength, in the traditional sense that the boxer had relied upon his entire career, became completely irrelevant when it could not find purchase, could not connect with resistance, could not transfer energy into damage. The boxer's breathing changed noticeably. It wasn't exhaustion yet. His conditioning was too good for that. But it was confusion, frustration, the psychological strain of expending massive effort without achieving results. He was committing force without consequence, throwing power into emptiness. This was deeply unsettling to a man trained to measure dominance through resistance and collapse, through the solid impact of fist on flesh and the visible damage that confirmed superiority. He adjusted tactics, his fighting intelligence searching for solutions. He attempted sharper entries, trying to close distance faster than Bruce could adjust. More decisive grips, trying to establish control before Bruce could slip away. Momentary bursts of maximum speed and power meant to overwhelm Bruce's timing and positioning. But each attempt was met with the same outcome, the same frustrating result. Contact without control. Pressure without effect. Structure without stability. The harder he tried to impose his will, to force the fight into familiar territory where his advantages mattered, the more that structure seemed to dissolve around him like sand through fingers. At one point, the boxer managed brief contact at close range, his massive hand actually gripping Bruce's forearm, the kind of position where fights usually turn violent very quickly. Several of the witnesses later recalled holding their breath simultaneously, expecting the sudden crack of impact, the unmistakable sound of a decisive strike that would end the demonstration. It never came. Instead, Bruce shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, so subtly that most watching couldn't identify what actually changed. His hips aligned microseconds before his shoulders, his spine adjusting as if pulled by an invisible thread, his structure reorganizing around the point of contact. The boxer stumbled half a step forward, not pushed, not thrown, not struck, simply displaced from his own balance by forces he couldn't identify or resist. Bruce didn't capitalize on the opening, didn't strike the exposed target, didn't press his advantage. He simply reset, calmly, as if nothing significant had occurred, as if the momentary control meant nothing at all. That was when the room understood something critical, something that changed how they viewed combat forever. Bruce Lee wasn't fighting to win in any traditional sense. He wasn't fighting to damage, to dominate, to prove superiority. He was fighting to gather information, to test principles, to understand completely. Every movement from the boxer was being read, analyzed, tested, and catalogued in real time. Bruce was mapping timing patterns, pressure habits, recovery sequences, and structural weaknesses, not with conscious analytical thought, but through embodied response refined by decades of training. The fight wasn't escalating into violence because Bruce wasn't allowing it to escalate. He was setting the tempo, controlling the rhythm, and that tempo was deliberately restrained, deliberately limited, deliberately safe. This restraint unnerved the boxer more than aggression ever could. In combat, violence offers clarity and purpose. It defines roles clearly, creates urgency that demands response, and forces decisions that resolve uncertainty. Bruce offered none of that comfortable clarity. He gave the boxer space to fail without punishment, time to realize what wasn't working, and silence in which doubt could grow and multiply. The boxer's movements became less precise as doubt accumulated. His commitment wavered between full aggression and cautious testing. He began to hesitate, not because he feared being struck. Bruce had thrown nothing resembling a finishing blow, but because he no longer understood what kind of confrontation he was in, what rules applied, what success even looked like. The witnesses noticed something else as well, another detail that added to the accumulating strangeness. Bruce's breathing never changed rhythm or depth. His face remained neutral, almost detached, showing no strain, no visible exertion, no emotional investment in outcome. His muscles were engaged and active, obviously working but not tense, not rigid, not fighting against themselves. His body moved as a single integrated unit, connected seamlessly from foot to fingertip, each adjustment flowing effortlessly into the next without visible transition or preparation. This wasn't speed for its own sake, wasn't evasiveness born of fear. It was efficiency taken to an unsettling extreme, refined to a level that seemed almost inhuman in its perfection. Several minutes passed, though later accounts would disagree significantly on exact duration. Time had become distorted in the alley, stretched and compressed by tension. Without dramatic spikes of action, without clear exchanges of dominance, the fight felt suspended in amber, frozen in a moment that refused to resolve itself. The boxer finally made a decisive move, committing fully to ending the stalemate. He stepped in hard, throwing his entire body weight behind a right cross aimed directly at Bruce's head, attempting to force a conclusion through sheer will and accumulated power. It was the most aggressive action of the encounter, the moment where traditional fighting logic insisted something had to break, someone had to fall, the confrontation had to reach conclusion. Something did break. It just wasn't Bruce. Bruce yielded instantly to the incoming force, not backward in retreat, but sideways in rotation, pivoting his body so that the boxer's massive power carried harmlessly past its intended target. In the same continuous motion, impossible to separate into distinct techniques, Bruce's hand made brief contact with the boxer's center, not striking, not pushing, simply touching with precise alignment and perfect timing. The effect was immediate and shocking to everyone watching. The boxer froze mid-motion, his entire posture collapsing internally before his body could react or adjust. His knees bent slightly without his permission. His shoulders dropped forward. His forward momentum vanished completely as if cut at the source, as if someone had suddenly turned off the power that drove him. The alley went completely still and silent. Bruce stepped back smoothly and lowered his hands to his sides. The fight was over. Though no one had announced it, no referee had called time, and no clear finishing move had been performed that could be pointed to and analyzed. The boxer stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the cracked asphalt beneath his feet, breathing heavily through his mouth, his expression no longer confrontational or confident, but unsettled, confused, as if he had reached a conclusion he hadn't been prepared for. Discovered a truth that contradicted everything he thought he knew. No one in the circle spoke. No one applauded or celebrated. There was nothing to celebrate, no victory to acknowledge. They had just witnessed a confrontation where dominance was established without damage, without spectacle, without visible victory that could be measured or recorded. And that, more than anything they had ever seen in decades of martial arts training, disturbed them profoundly. No one in the alley moved for several long seconds after it ended. There was no signal that the encounter was finished, no bow, no declaration, no visible injury to mark a conclusion. Yet everyone present understood instinctively that whatever had just taken place was complete, resolved, finished. The boxer did not attempt to re-engage. He did not raise his guard or reset his stance for another round. He simply stood where he was. Massive shoulders lowered, breathing heavy and labored, staring at the oil-stained asphalt as if something fundamental had been rearranged inside him, as if the internal map he used to navigate reality had been redrawn without his permission. Bruce Lee said nothing. That silence carried more weight than any victory shout ever could. In traditional martial culture, words often serve to restore order after conflict. They define meaning, explain outcome, preserve face, and protect ego. Bruce offered none of that comfort. He simply stepped back calmly, relaxed his posture completely, and waited. Not for approval, not for acknowledgement, but for the alley to settle, for normal reality to return. One of the witnesses would later describe the feeling, struggling to find adequate language, as standing inside a collapsed hierarchy. Everything they thought they understood about dominance, power, and confrontation had failed to apply to what they just witnessed. There had been no display of superior strength, no visible technique that could be easily copied or trained, no dramatic finishing blow to point at and say, that was it, that's what decided the outcome. And yet the result was undeniable, obvious to everyone present. One man had entered the alley intending to test Bruce Lee's philosophy against brutal reality. He left having been tested himself, having discovered limits he didn't know existed. The boxer eventually lifted his head slowly. His expression had changed completely from the confident aggression he had carried into the alley. The certainty was gone, replaced by something far more difficult to articulate or accept. It wasn't fear of physical harm. It wasn't humiliation from being beaten. It was uncertainty, doubt, the deeply uncomfortable realization that he had committed fully, used the methods that had worked for him his entire professional career, and discovered that they no longer guaranteed anything at all. Bruce had not defeated him in a way that could be challenged or disputed through rematch or argument. He had simply removed the framework in which victory made sense, dissolved the structure in which dominance could be measured and confirmed. This was why the fight would never be publicly discussed by anyone present. There was no narrative that preserved status or protected reputation. No one present could explain what had happened without undermining the traditions and assumptions they had spent decades defending and building their identities upon. Bruce hadn't broken rules or regulations. He hadn't disrespected lineage or cultural tradition. He hadn't even contradicted their teachings directly with words or criticism. He had done something far worse, far more threatening to established order. He had shown, quietly and unmistakably, that effectiveness did not require permission from tradition, did not need validation from hierarchy, did not depend on following the established path. As the alley slowly relaxed, small movements resumed cautiously. Someone shifted their stance, weight moving from one foot to another. Another man exhaled deeply, realizing only then how tense he had been. How much he had been holding his breath. The boxer took a step back, then another, creating physical distance not out of fear, but out of instinctive recalibration. The body's automatic need to reset after discovering that reality operates differently than believed. Bruce remained where he was, calm, attentive, his breathing unchanged and steady. Finally, someone spoke. Not about the fight directly, but about logistics, about practical concerns, about time, about the alley, about mundane details. The mundane reality of normal life rushed back in eagerly, filling the vacuum left by something no one wanted to analyze too closely or discuss too openly. Jackets were adjusted. Hands were rubbed together nervously. The circle dissolved without comment or coordination, men simply moving away from their positions against the walls. Bruce gathered his simple belongings, a small bag he had left near the wall. There was no lingering, no attempt to assert meaning or claim insight or demand acknowledgement. He understood something the others did not yet fully grasp. What had just occurred could not be taught through explanation or demonstration. It could only be experienced directly, and only under very specific conditions that couldn't be easily replicated. Speaking about it too openly would reduce it to theory, and theory was exactly what he had just demonstrated was insufficient for understanding real combat. As Bruce moved toward the alley exit, the boxer spoke quietly, almost reluctantly. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't an accusation or excuse. It was a question, stripped of ego and defensive posture, asked by someone genuinely trying to understand what had just happened to him. Bruce paused, listened carefully, and responded briefly. No one else heard what was said. Whatever it was, it ended the conversation entirely, left nothing more to discuss. They never fought again. In the days that followed, rumors circulated through Los Angeles' martial arts community, vague and contradictory. Some said Bruce had been tested by a professional boxer and passed. Others said the encounter was inconclusive, that nothing definitive had happened. A few dismissed it entirely, claiming nothing significant occurred at all, just talking and posturing. Those explanations satisfied people who needed certainty and clear categories. They did not satisfy the men who had been in the alley. Those men noticed changes in their own training afterward. Subtle at first, barely perceptible. A hesitation before committing force. A curiosity about alignment rather than raw power. An awareness of balance not as a fixed position, but as a continuous process of adjustment. They found themselves questioning techniques that had once felt unquestionable, not because they were weak or flawed, but because they suddenly seemed incomplete, optimized for specific conditions that didn't always apply. Bruce Lee returned to his teaching with renewed intensity and focus. He began emphasizing concepts that were difficult to demonstrate and even harder to measure objectively. Flow, recovery, interruption, integration. He spoke less about specific techniques and more about underlying conditions. Less about winning exchanges and more about controlling variables. To outsiders, it sounded abstract and impractical. To those who had seen the silent fight, it was unmistakably concrete, clearly grounded in direct experience. The encounter was never recorded. To acknowledge what had happened publicly would have forced them to choose between truth and tradition, between what they saw and what they were supposed to believe. They chose silence. And yet, the consequences of that silent fight would ripple outward invisibly, shaping Bruce Lee's philosophy in ways that would later confuse, inspire, and threaten established systems far beyond that small alley in Los Angeles. Because the fight had proven something dangerous, not that Bruce Lee was unbeatable, but that the rules everyone relied on were optional. No photographs were taken. No official accounts were written. The names of most witnesses were intentionally excluded from later retellings when anyone spoke of it at all. Not out of conspiracy or secrecy, but out of protection.